In 73 years of living, I thought I'd seen everything nature had to offer. I was dead wrong. That October morning, sitting on my porch with coffee growing cold in my hands, I watched a bobcat kitten do something no wild creature should ever do. Walk straight up to Mrs. Patterson's mailbox like he owned the place. Not skulking, not hunting, just greeting the world. "Something's not sitting right," I muttered, setting down my cup. The little fella couldn't have been more than 4 months old, all tufted ears and oversized paws. When he spotted me watching, those amber eyes met mine without a flicker of fear. He chirped, actually chirped, like he was saying good morning. Every instinct I'd developed studying wildlife for 40 years started screaming warnings. Bobcats don't act like house cats. They sure as hell don't approach humans. That little guy was carrying a burden no creature should bear. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. The next morning brought more of the same impossible behavior. I'd positioned myself on the porch before sunrise, determined to understand what I was seeing. Sure enough, just as the neighborhood started stirring, that bobcat kitten appeared again. This time he stationed himself right at the corner of sycamore and pine, like some kind of four-legged crossing guard. When old Jim Henderson shuffled past on his morning walk, the kitten actually approached him. Jim nearly jumped out of his skin, but the little guy just sat there, patient as you please, waiting for something. "Thomas!" Jake Morrison's voice cut through the morning quiet. He was stomping across his perfectly manicured lawn, face red as a beet. "That thing's gonna bring a whole pack down on us. My grandkids play in this neighborhood." "He's just a baby, Jake. Lost and scared." I kept my voice level, though my hands were shaking slightly around my coffee mug. The same tremor that had started 3 years ago and never quite left. "Lost my ass? Bobcats don't get lost, they get rabid." Jake planted himself at the bottom of my porch steps, arms crossed. "You need to call animal control before somebody gets hurt." I looked past him to where the kitten had moved onto Mrs. Patterson's garden gate. She was peeking through her kitchen curtains, phone pressed to her ear, probably calling the whole neighborhood phone tree. The little guy just sat there, tail twitching, those intelligent eyes scanning the street like he was waiting for a bus. "That's not natural behavior, Thomas," Jake pressed. "You know it, I know it. Stop being sentimental." The word hit me like a slap. Margaret used to say the same thing when I'd bring home injured birds or lost dogs. "Tommy, you can't save everything that wanders into your yard." But this felt different. The kitten's posture, the way he moved with such deliberate purpose, this wasn't random wandering. "Every creature deserves a fighting chance," I said, the words coming out sharper than intended. Jake threw up his hands. "Fine, but when that thing attacks someone, don't come crying to me." He stalked back to his house, muttering about bleeding hearts and city folk who don't know wildlife. I watched the kitten for another hour. He never begged, never seemed hungry, just watched, waited, like he was on some kind of mission that only made sense to him. As the sun climbed higher, he trotted away toward the tree line with that same purposeful gait, but not before turning back once to look at me, head tilted like he was trying to figure me out too. That's when I knew I had to follow him. The third morning, I was ready. I dug out my old field notebook, the leather one Margaret had given me for my retirement, and positioned myself with a clear view of the kitten's usual route. When he appeared at exactly 6:47 a.m., I started documenting everything. 6:47. Subject appears from southwest tree line, 6:52. Approaches Henderson's mailbox, sits for 3 minutes. 6:55. Moves to Patterson Garden Gate. Similar behavior. 7:03. Proceeds toward Morrison property line. The pattern was unmistakable. This wasn't random behavior. The kitten had a schedule, a purpose. every movement calculated, every stop deliberate. I'd studied enough wildlife to recognize intelligence when I saw it, but this was something else entirely. At 7:15, just as he had the previous mornings, the kitten headed toward the dense woods that bordered our development. This time, I was going to follow. I grabbed my walking stick and slipped out the back door, circling around to intercept his path. The October air carried the scent of pine needles and dying leaves, reminding me of countless research expeditions in my younger days. But following a bobcat kitten through suburban undergrowth at 68 wasn't exactly what I'd planned for retirement. The kitten moved with surprising speed for something so small. I struggled to keep up, my knees protesting every uneven step. Brambles caught at my jacket, and more than once I nearly lost sight of that tufted tail disappearing through the vegetation. Then, without warning, the sounds of the neighborhood faded completely. We'd entered what locals called the Back 40, a strip of undeveloped land that ran along an old stormwater management system. The kitten paused at the edge of a concrete culvert, ears swiveling like tiny radar dishes. That's when the memory hit me, like a physical blow. 3 years earlier, Michael, standing in this exact spot. "Dad, you're not listening to me." My son's voice carried that edge of frustration I'd grown too familiar with. "I don't want to be a research scientist. I want to work with my hands, build something real." "Son, you have a master's degree in biology. You can't just throw that away to become a carpenter." I was using my professor voice, the one that had shut down classroom arguments for decades. "Watch me." Michael's eyes, the same amber-flecked green as his mother's, flashed with determination. "Not everything in life can be cataloged and studied, Dad. Some things you just have to feel. If you don't understand the system, you can't survive in it," I'd shot back. "That's not sentiment, that's fact." The look on his face when he turned away. God, I should have known that would be the last real conversation we'd ever have. The kitten's sharp chirp snapped me back to the present. He'd moved closer to the culvert entrance, and now I could see what had captured his attention. And the concrete opening was partially blocked by fallen branches and debris, but there was definitely a gap large enough for a small animal to squeeze through. More disturbing was the smell, faint but unmistakable. Death, decay. Something was wrong down there. The kitten looked back at me once, those intelligent eyes seeming to weigh something. Then he disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for a long moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every rational part of my brain said to turn around, go home, call the proper authorities. But Michael's voice echoed in my head. "Some things you just have to feel." I pulled out my phone and called the one person I trusted to understand. "Dr. Martinez, this is Thomas Fletcher. I know it's early, but I need your professional opinion about something unusual." Sarah Martinez had been the county's wildlife rehabilitation specialist for over a decade. If anyone could make sense of what I was seeing, it was her. "Thomas, what's going on?" "I've got a juvenile bobcat displaying highly abnormal behavior, approaching humans, following specific patterns, and now I think—" I paused, watching the culvert entrance. "I think there might be others down in the old storm system." "Others?" "Thomas, bobcat families don't den in storm drains. Too much human activity, wrong substrate." "Sarah, in 40 years of fieldwork, have you ever seen a bobcat kitten actively seek out human contact?" Silence on the other end. Then, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. While I waited, I tried to process what I'd observed. The kitten's behavior suggested either severe neurological damage, rabies, distemper, brain trauma, or something else entirely, something that required a different kind of understanding. Margaret's voice whispered in my memory. "Tommy, sometimes the most important discoveries can't be measured or categorized. Sometimes you just have to trust your heart." I'd dismissed her words as romantic nonsense back then. Now, standing at the edge of that dark culvert with the smell of death in my nostrils, I wondered if she'd been trying to teach me something I'd been too proud to learn. The kitten emerged 20 minutes later, moving more slowly than before. His small body seemed to carry an enormous weight, and for the first time since I'd been watching him, he looked like what he was, a baby, alone and overwhelmed. When he saw me still standing there, he stopped. We regarded each other across 10 feet of scrub grass and fallen leaves. In that moment, I saw something in his eyes that made my chest tight with recognition. The same look Michael had worn that last day. The expression of someone carrying a burden too heavy for their shoulders, trying desperately to do the right thing without any guidance from the adults who should have been helping. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not sure if I was talking to the kitten or to my son's memory. Dr. Martinez's truck, rumbling up the access road, broke the spell. The kitten melted back into the underbrush, but not before giving me one last look, a look that seemed to say, "Now you know. What are you going to do about it?" As Sarah emerged from her vehicle with her equipment bag, I realized that for the first time in 3 years, I felt truly awake, alert, needed. Maybe understanding wasn't about systems after all. Maybe it was about having the courage to follow a small creature into the darkness, trusting that the answers we needed would be there waiting. "Show me," Sarah said simply, and I did. Dr. Sarah Martinez crouched beside the culvert entrance, her experienced hands examining the debris and scratch marks around the opening. At 45, she moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent years working with unpredictable wildlife, but I could see the concern etched in the lines around her eyes. "Thomas, this doesn't look good." She played her flashlight beam into the darkness. "The smell you mentioned, that's decomposition, and these claw marks." She traced deep gouges in the concrete with her finger. "Something's been trying to get out. Or get in." "The kitten went down there," I said, my voice sounding older than I felt. "He's been doing this for days. Same time, same route." Sarah sat back on her heels, studying me with the same intensity she'd been examining the culvert. "In 20 years of wildlife rehabilitation, I've seen maybe 3 cases of bobcats approaching humans voluntarily. All of them involved extreme distress, mothers protecting injured young, animals with neurological damage, or—" She paused. "Or what?" "Starvation. Desperate enough to overcome every survival instinct they possess." The weight of her words settled over me like a cold blanket. Before I could respond, Jake Morrison's voice cut through the morning air. "Well, well. Look what we have here." He emerged from the tree line, red-faced and breathing hard. "I saw you sneaking around back here, Thomas. What the hell are you up to?" "Jake, this isn't—" "And you brought the animal control lady, finally coming to your senses?" Jake's eyes fixed on Dr. Martinez with obvious relief. "Ma'am, we've got a rabid bobcat terrorizing our neighborhood. I hope you brought a tranquilizer gun." Dr. Martinez stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. "Mr. Morrison. Jake Morrison. I live right up that hill." He gestured toward his property line, which I now realized ran much closer to this area than I'd thought. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Dr. Martinez, wildlife rehabilitation specialist. What makes you think the animal is rabid?" "What makes me think?" Jake's voice rose. "The damn thing walks up to people. It sits in the middle of the street. That's not normal behavior." "You're right," Sarah said calmly. "It's not normal. But rabies isn't the only explanation." I watched Jake's face cycle through confusion, frustration, and something else. Was that fear? "Look, lady, I don't care what's wrong with it. I've got grandkids who visit. My property borders this whole area." He waved toward the storm system. Whatever's down there needs to be dealt with before someone gets hurt. Your property borders here? Sarah's question seemed casual, but I caught the sharp attention in her voice. Been living here 15 years? Know every inch of these woods. Jake's chest puffed with pride. I keep this whole area clear of dangerous wildlife. Got to, for the safety of the community. How do you keep it clear? The question came out before I could stop myself. Jake's eyes narrowed. Legal methods, Thomas. Unlike some people, I follow proper protocols. He turned back to Sarah. Point is, whatever's down there needs professional handling, not some retired professor playing amateur naturalist. The insult stung, but something in Jake's defensive posture nagged at me. I'd known him for 10 years, and I'd never seen him this agitated about wildlife. Hell, he'd never shown much interest in anything beyond his lawn and golf game. Dr. Martinez, I said, I think we need to see what's down there. Thomas, if there are animals in distress, this needs to be handled carefully. We can't just... I'm going down. The words came out with more conviction than I felt. That kitten has been trying to tell us something. I owe it to him to find out what. Jake stepped forward, his face flushing deeper. You're not going anywhere, old man. This is dangerous. Call the proper authorities. Let them handle it. I am the proper authority, Sarah interjected. And if Thomas wants to assist, that's his choice. This is insane, Jake's voice cracked slightly. You people are going to get yourselves killed over some sick animal. Let nature take its course. Sometimes nature needs a helping hand, I replied, echoing the words I'd said to him days earlier. But now they carried more weight, more purpose. Sarah was already unpacking equipment from her bag, heavy-duty flashlights, a first aid kit, protective gloves, and what looked like a portable sedation kit. If we're doing this, we do it right. Thomas, you stay behind me at all times. If I say retreat, we retreat immediately. As she handed me a flashlight and gloves, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. The kitten had returned, sitting about 20 feet away, watching our preparations with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. There he is, I whispered. Sarah followed my gaze and went very still. For a long moment, the four of us, Sarah, Jake, myself, and the kitten, formed a strange tableau in the dappled morning light filtering through the trees. Jesus, Jake breathed. Look at the size of that thing. That's not a house cat. The kitten seemed to understand he was the center of attention. Instead of fleeing, he stood and walked purposefully toward the culvert entrance. He paused there, looking back at us with what I could only describe as expectation. He wants us to follow, I said. Animals don't want things, Thomas, Sarah replied, but her voice lacked conviction. They respond to stimuli, follow instincts. The kitten chirped once, a clear, deliberate sound, and disappeared into the darkness. That settles it. I started toward the entrance, but Sarah caught my arm. Thomas, wait. Let me go first. She clipped the portable light to her shirt and pulled on heavy gloves. Jake, I need you to stay up here. If something goes wrong, call 911 immediately. You're both crazy, Jake muttered, but he was already backing away from the entrance. This is how people end up on the evening news. Sarah squeezed into the culvert opening, her light beam dancing across concrete walls slick with moisture and debris. I followed, my knees protesting as I crawled through the narrow space. The smell that had been merely unpleasant above ground became overwhelming down here. The thick, sweet stench of death mixed with something else, something alive but sick. Thomas. Sarah's voice echoed strangely in the confined space. You need to see this. I crawled forward until I was beside her, and she angled her light toward the back of the culvert. What I saw there drove the breath from my lungs. Curled in a makeshift nest of leaves and debris was an adult female bobcat. Even in the harsh LED light, I could see she was in terrible condition. Emaciated, her fur matted with mud and worse. Her back leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, swollen and dark with infection, but she was alive. Her amber eyes reflected our lights, watching us with the same intelligence I'd seen in the kitten, but dulled by pain and exhaustion. And pressed against her side, barely moving, were two tiny bobcat kittens, much smaller than the one who'd led us here, much weaker. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The kitten we'd been watching, he wasn't lost or sick or rabid. He was foraging, trying to keep his family alive. Every morning, venturing into the human world he'd been taught to fear, hoping to find scraps, handouts, anything that might sustain them for another day. "How long?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Sarah played her light over the adult female's injuries. Based on the infection, the condition of the young, weeks, maybe longer. Behind us, Jake's voice drifted down from the entrance. "What's taking so long? Is it safe?" I looked at the dying mother, at her babies who might not survive another day, at the evidence of a family fighting desperately against impossible odds. And I thought about Michael, about all the times I'd chosen logic over compassion, analysis over action. "No," I called back to Jake. "It's not safe at all." The adult female bobcat, Sarah had started calling her Eleanor, lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Up close, the severity of her condition was heartbreaking. Her left hind leg was mangled beyond repair, the bone visible through infected tissue that had turned a sickly green-black color. "Thomas, we need to get her out of here immediately," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with professional concern. "That infection has gone septic. She's dying." The two tiny kittens pressed against their mother's belly were barely larger than my fist. Their eyes were still closed, and they moved with the weak, uncoordinated motions of animals on the edge of starvation. As we watched, our brave little scout, the kitten who'd been making those dangerous daily trips, appeared at the mouth of the culvert. He chirped softly, and Eleanor's ears twitched in response. "He's been doing this for how long?" Sarah asked, studying the makeshift nest. "I first saw him 4 days ago, but based on his behavior," I paused, remembering the worn path he'd been following, the practiced way he approached potential food sources. "Could be weeks." Sarah played her flashlight over Eleanor's injuries again, and her professional composure cracked slightly. "Jesus Christ, look at this." Embedded in the infected tissue were metal fragments, twisted pieces of steel that gleamed dully in the LED light. My blood ran cold as I recognized what I was seeing. "That's not from a car accident," I said. "No, those are trap fragments, bear trap from the look of it." Sarah's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "Someone set an illegal trap, and she got caught in it." The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't an accident or natural misfortune. Someone in our peaceful suburban community had set a trap designed to maim or kill large animals, and Eleanor had paid the price. "We need to call the police," I said, pulling out my phone. "First we save her life, then we worry about who did this." Sarah was already assembling her sedation equipment. "Thomas, I need you to go up and tell Jake to bring my truck down as close as possible. We're going to need—" "What the hell is going on down there?" Jake's voice echoed down the culvert, tinged with impatience and something else. Was that nervousness? I crawled back toward the entrance, my mind racing. The trap fragments, Jake's defensive behavior, his insistence that we let nature take its course. When I emerged into daylight, Jake was pacing near the culvert entrance, his face flushed and sweaty despite the cool October air. "Jake, we need Dr. Martinez's truck brought down here. There's an injured adult female with babies." His face went white. "Injured how?" "Bear trap. Illegal one, from the look of it." I watched his reaction carefully. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "Why the hell would I know about illegal traps?" But his voice cracked on the last word, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. Because your property borders this area. Because you're always talking about keeping it clear of dangerous wildlife. Because you've been acting strange since the first day I mentioned the kitten. Jake backed away from me, his hands shaking. Thomas, you're way out of line here. I had nothing to do with any trap. But even as he denied it, I could see the guilt written across his face. The pieces were falling into place. His nervousness around wildlife discussions, his insistence on calling animal control, his knowledge of this area despite claiming he avoided it. Jake, my voice came out harder than I intended. How long ago did you set that trap? I didn't. He stopped, realizing what he'd almost admitted. Jesus, Thomas. It wasn't supposed to hurt anything big. I thought maybe it would scare off the coyotes, keep them from coming near the house when my grandkids visit. The confession hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. 3 weeks of suffering, a mother slowly dying while her babies starved, a brave kitten risking his life daily to keep his family alive, all because Jake Morrison was afraid of shadows in the woods. You son of a bitch, I said, stepping toward him. It was an accident. Jake's voice rose to a near shout. I said it weeks ago and forgot about it. I never meant for this to happen. You forgot about a bear trap? You forgot about a device designed to crush bone? Dr. Martinez's voice cut through our confrontation as she emerged from the culvert. Thomas, I need that truck now. Eleanor's crashing. Her pulse is getting weaker. The immediate crisis refocused my attention. Whatever Jake had done, whatever consequences he faced, could wait. Right now, we had lives to save. Jake's truck is closer, I said, making a decision that surprised even me. Jake, you're going to help us get that family to the clinic. It's the least you can do. Thomas, I can't. Yes, you can. And you will. I stepped closer to him, using every inch of my height advantage, because if that mother dies, if those babies die, you're going to live with their blood on your hands for the rest of your life. Jake's face crumpled. Oh God, I never meant. I just wanted to protect my family. Then help us protect theirs. The next 30 minutes were a blur of careful, desperate activity. Sarah sedated Eleanor with a combination that would keep her unconscious but stable during transport. We fashioned a makeshift stretcher from Jake's emergency kit and a tarp, moving her with agonizing care to avoid further damage to her mangled leg. The 3 tiny kittens, our scout and his 2 weaker siblings, rode in a heated carrier on Sarah's lap as Jake drove us toward the wildlife clinic with the careful precision of a man trying to atone for a terrible mistake. Will she make it? I asked as we pulled into the clinic parking lot. Sarah checked Eleanor's pulse again. I don't know. The infection is systemic and she's lost a lot of blood. But she's a fighter. Had to be, to survive this long. As we carried Eleanor into the clinic, I caught sight of her son, the brave little scout who'd started this whole journey. He was pressed against the mesh of the carrier, those intelligent amber eyes fixed on his mother. Even sedated and dying, Eleanor's ear twitched when he chirped softly. What happens if she doesn't make it? Jake asked quietly. Then 3 orphaned Bobcat kittens become your responsibility, Sarah replied without looking up from her preparations. Along with whatever legal consequences come from setting illegal traps on public land. Jake's face went ashen. Legal consequences? Bear traps are illegal in this county, Jake. Setting them near residential areas, near hiking trails, you're looking at significant fines, possible jail time. As Sarah wheeled Eleanor into surgery, I found myself alone in the waiting room with Jake Morrison. The man who'd been my neighbor for 10 years sat hunched in a plastic chair, his head in his hands. I never meant for this to happen, he said again. I know. And surprisingly, I did. Jake wasn't evil. He was scared, ignorant, and careless. A dangerous combination, but not malicious. The question is, what are you going to do about it now? He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Whatever you think I should do. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I thought about Michael. About the conversation we'd had in these same woods, about the gulf that had opened between us because I couldn't see past my own rigid thinking. We're going to save this family, I said. All of them. And then we're going to make sure this never happens again. Jake nodded, something like relief flooding his features. How? I looked through the window toward the surgery suite where Dr. Martinez was fighting to save Eleanor's life. However long it takes. The surgery lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of pacing sterile hallways, drinking terrible coffee, and watching Jake Morrison slowly come apart at the seams. Every 20 minutes, he'd start to say something, an apology, an explanation, a justification, then stop himself, seemingly realizing that no words could undo what his carelessness had caused. Dr. Martinez emerged from the surgical suite at 2:30 p.m., her scrubs stained with blood and her face drawn with exhaustion. She pulled off her surgical mask and sat heavily in the chair across from us. "She's alive," she said, and I felt something in my chest unclench. But it was touch and go. The infection had spread further than I initially thought. I had to amputate the leg higher than I'd hoped. Took it off just below the hip joint. Jake made a strangled sound. Can she survive with 3 legs? Bobcats are remarkably adaptable. In the wild, 3-legged cats can hunt, climb, even raise young successfully. But, Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. She's going to need months of rehabilitation. And those kittens, they're severely malnourished. The 2 younger ones especially. Without their mother's milk, without proper nutrition. What do they need? I asked. Round-the-clock care. Bottle feeding every 2 hours. Temperature regulation. The older kitten, your little Scout, he's in better shape, but even he's underweight for his age. I thought about the past weeks, about that brave little creature making his dangerous daily journeys, sharing whatever scraps he could find with his dying family. He saved them. He bought them time, Sarah corrected. Whether it's enough time depends on the next 72 hours. The waiting room door opened, and Mrs. Patterson shuffled in, followed by 3 other neighbors I recognized from the development. Word had spread through the neighborhood phone tree, apparently, and our small drama had become community business. "Thomas?" Mrs. Patterson's voice was tentative. "We heard about the Bobcat family. About what happened." Her eyes found Jake, and her expression hardened. About what really happened. Jake flinched as if she'd struck him. "Mrs. Patterson, Save it, Jake Morrison." Her voice carried the righteous anger of a woman who'd raised 4 children and wasn't impressed by grown men making excuses. "What I want to know is what we're going to do to fix this mess." Behind her, Bob Chen and the Hendersons nodded agreement. I realized that while Jake and I had been sitting in our private hell of guilt and recrimination, these people had been organizing. "We took up a collection," Bob said, producing an envelope thick with cash. "For the veterinary bills, whatever the animals need." "And we called the county," Mrs. Henderson added, "filed a formal complaint about the illegal trapping. They're sending someone out tomorrow to survey the area, make sure there aren't any more surprises waiting in the woods." Jake's face went gray. "I already told Dr. Martinez and Thomas there was only one trap. I said it and forgot about it." "Forgot about it." Mrs. Patterson's voice could have etched glass. "Jake Morrison, that woman has been lying in that storm drain for weeks, slowly dying, while her baby starved. Because you forgot." "I know, damn it. I know what I did." Jake stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum. "You think I don't see her face every time I close my eyes? You think I'm not going to hear those kittens crying for the rest of my life?" The raw pain in his voice surprised me. For all his bluster and defensiveness, Jake was genuinely destroyed by what he'd caused. It didn't excuse his actions, but it was something to build on. "Jake," my voice cut through the tension. "Sit down." He looked at me with something approaching gratitude and sank back into his chair. "Mrs. Patterson, Bob, everyone, thank you for the collection, for calling the county. But right now our focus needs to be on the animals. Recriminations can wait." Sarah had been watching this exchange with interest. Now she cleared her throat. "If I could interrupt, there's something else we need to discuss. Eleanor and her kittens are going to need specialized care for several months. The clinic can handle the immediate medical needs, but long-term rehabilitation requires more space, more resources than we have here." "What kind of space?" I asked. "Ideally, a large, secure outdoor enclosure where Eleanor can relearn to hunt and move with 3 legs, where the kittens can develop their natural behaviors before eventual release. It's expensive, specialized work." The room fell quiet. I could see the neighbors doing mental math, calculating the costs against their suburban budgets. Even pooling resources, this was beyond what our small community could manage. "I'll pay for it." Jake's voice was barely audible. "Whatever it costs, specialized care, rehabilitation, everything." "Jake, that could be thousands of dollars," Bob warned. "Then it's thousands of dollars." Jake looked up, meeting each person's eyes in turn. "I did this. I broke this family apart. If money can help put them back together, then that's what happens." Mrs. Patterson studied him for a long moment. "This isn't about money, Jake. This is about responsibility. About understanding that our actions have consequences for other living things." "I understand that now," Jake said quietly. "Believe me, I understand." Dr. Martinez looked between Jake and the assembled neighbors. "There's one more thing. Even with perfect care, rehabilitation, and eventual release, Eleanor and her family can't go back to your area. Too much human activity and, frankly, too much history. They'll need to be relocated to a protected habitat." "Where?" I asked. "There's a wildlife preserve about 60 miles north. Perfect bobcat habitat, minimal human interference, but—" She hesitated. "It means you'll probably never see them again. Once they're released, they'll be truly wild animals in their proper environment." The finality of that statement hit me harder than I'd expected. For the past week, that little scout had become a fixture in my daily routine. Watching him, worrying about him, had given me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Michael's death. The idea of never knowing whether he was safe, whether he'd grown into a healthy adult, whether his mother had fully recovered. "That's how it should be," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Wild animals belong in the wild," Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all day. "Thomas, would you like to see them? Eleanor should be waking up from the anesthesia soon." I followed her down a hallway lined with recovery cages. In the largest enclosure, Eleanor lay on a thick fleece blanket, her breathing steady but her eyes still clouded from the anesthesia. The surgical site where her leg had been was neatly bandaged, and she wore a protective cone to prevent her from disturbing the stitches. In a smaller, heated enclosure nearby, the 3 kittens huddled together under a warming lamp. The 2 smaller ones were connected to tiny feeding tubes, but our scout, our brave little hero, was sitting up, alert despite his ordeal. When he saw me approach, he made that same soft, chirping sound I'd heard that first morning on my porch. But this time, it didn't sound like a greeting. It sounded like recognition, like gratitude. "He knows you," Sarah said softly. "We've been through something together," I replied, thinking about our shared journey through fear and uncertainty toward this moment of fragile hope. Behind us, I heard footsteps and turned to see Jake approaching hesitantly. When the kitten saw him, his body tensed, and he moved protectively in front of his smaller siblings. "He doesn't trust me," Jake observed, his voice thick with emotion. "Can you blame him?" I asked. Trust has to be earned, Jake, especially from someone who's been hurt. Jake nodded, understanding that we weren't just talking about bobcats anymore. How do I earn it? I looked at Eleanor, sleeping off her surgery, and at her 3 babies who'd survived against impossible odds. By proving that you've learned something, by making sure this never happens again, by being the neighbor this community deserves, and by paying attention, Mrs. Patterson added from behind us. She'd followed us down the hall along with the other neighbors. By caring about the consequences of your actions before you act, not after. Jake studied the sleeping bobcat family for a long moment. I can do that, he said finally. I have to do that. As we stood there in the quiet recovery room, watching over our unlikely charges, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. The sense that we were all exactly where we needed to be. Not because it was easy or comfortable, but because it was right. Eleanor's ear twitched, and her eyes fluttered open. For a moment she seemed confused, disoriented. Then her gaze found her kittens in the nearby enclosure, and she relaxed back into sleep. She knows they're safe, Sarah whispered. And for the first time since this all began, so did I. The crisis hit at 3 a.m. on the 4th night. My phone rang with the shrill urgency that only comes with emergency calls, jerking me from the first decent sleep I'd had in a week. Dr. Martinez's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Thomas, I need you at the clinic. Now. Eleanor's crashing." I threw on clothes and drove through empty streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. When I arrived, the clinic was blazing with lights, and Sarah met me at the door with her face drawn in exhaustion. What happened? Post-surgical complications. Her body's rejecting the antibiotics, and she's developed what looks like septic shock. Her temperature spiked to 106. Blood pressure dropped dangerously low. Sarah led me quickly down the hallway. "I've got her on IV fluids and a different antibiotic cocktail, but, Thomas, her body's been through too much." In the recovery room, Eleanor lay motionless except for the rapid, shallow breathing that indicated severe distress. Monitors beeped ominously, displaying numbers that even my limited medical knowledge recognized as critical. Her remaining hind leg twitched occasionally, the only sign that she was still fighting. "How long does she have?" I asked. "Hours, maybe less." Sarah checked the IV line running into Eleanor's front leg. "I've done everything medically possible. The rest is up to her." In the adjacent enclosure, the 3 kittens seemed to sense their mother's distress. The 2 smaller ones mewed continuously, weak, pitiful sounds that cut through me like knives. But it was our scout's behavior that broke my heart. He sat pressed against the mesh closest to his mother, completely still, those intelligent eyes fixed on her labored breathing. "If she doesn't make it..." I couldn't finish the question. "The kittens are old enough to survive on formula, but they'll need intensive care for months. And honestly, without their mother's behavioral teaching, successful rehabilitation becomes much more difficult." I pulled a chair close to Eleanor's enclosure and sat down heavily. The weight of the past week, the discovery, the rescue, Jake's confession, the surgery, suddenly felt crushing. We'd come so far, fought so hard, and now we were going to lose her anyway. "I should call Jake," I said. "I already did. He's on his way." 20 minutes later, Jake arrived looking haggard and frightened. He'd obviously thrown on whatever clothes were nearest, mismatched socks, an inside-out sweatshirt, hair standing at odd angles. When he saw Eleanor's condition, he sank into a chair as if his legs had given out. "This is my fault," he whispered. "Jake." "No, Thomas. Don't try to make me feel better. That beautiful animal is dying because I was too lazy and careless to properly secure a trap I should never have set in the first place." His voice cracked. And those babies. God, those babies are going to be orphans because of me. I wanted to argue with him, to offer some comfort, but the truth was, he was right. Eleanor's current crisis was a direct result of the weeks she'd spent trapped, the infection that had ravaged her system, the malnutrition and stress that had weakened her body beyond recovery. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway. There's something else. The two smaller kittens, they're not responding well to the formula. Without their mother's milk, their immune systems are compromised. If Eleanor dies, she didn't need to finish. We all understood. This wasn't just about losing one animal. This was about the potential extinction of an entire family unit. There has to be something, Jake said desperately. Some other treatment, some specialist, something money can fix. Sarah shook her head. I've consulted with every wildlife veterinarian in the state. Eleanor's receiving the best possible care. Sometimes that's not enough. I found myself thinking about Michael, about the night I'd gotten the call from the hospital. The same feeling of helplessness, of watching something precious slip away despite everyone's best efforts. But this time felt different. This time, we'd had the chance to make a difference, and we'd taken it. Sarah, I said slowly, what would happen if we brought the kittens closer to Eleanor? Let them be near her. Thomas, if she's contagious, is she? The sepsis, the complications, are they transmissible? Sarah considered this. No, but the stress of having the kittens nearby, the energy expenditure of trying to care for them, might give her something to fight for, Jake finished quietly. We all looked at Eleanor, whose breathing had become even more labored in the past few minutes. The monitors showed her vital signs continuing to deteriorate. It's a risk, Sarah said. If the proximity causes additional stress, it could accelerate her decline. And if we don't try? I asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she began opening the kitten enclosure. Help me move them. We carefully transferred the 3 kittens to Eleanor's larger enclosure, placing them on the warming blanket near her front paws. The 2 smaller ones immediately began trying to nurse, their tiny bodies pressing against their mother's belly. Our scout settled himself near Eleanor's head, that same protective position he'd maintained throughout their ordeal. For several minutes, nothing changed. Eleanor's breathing remained labored, her temperature stayed dangerously high. The monitors continued their ominous chorus of beeps and alarms. Then, almost imperceptibly, Eleanor's breathing began to slow. Not the shallow panting of distress, but deeper, more controlled respirations. Her blood pressure monitor showed a slight uptick. Her temperature dropped half a degree. She's responding, Sarah whispered, afraid to speak too loudly. Over the next hour, we watched Eleanor slowly stabilize. Her vital signs didn't return to normal, but they stopped their precipitous decline. More importantly, she began to show awareness of her kittens. Her ears twitched when they mewed. Her remaining back leg shifted slightly to accommodate their nursing attempts. Look, Jake said softly. Eleanor's eyes had opened and she was looking directly at her scout. The kitten chirped once, that same sound I'd first heard on my porch a week ago, and Eleanor responded with a low rumble that I could feel more than hear. She's purring, Sarah said, wonder evident in her voice. I've never heard a wild bobcat purr before. She's not just a wild bobcat, I replied. She's a mother. We stayed through the rest of the night, taking turns monitoring Eleanor's condition and helping Sarah with the complex medical care the family required. By dawn, Eleanor's temperature had dropped to near normal levels, and she was taking small amounts of water on her own. The 2 smaller kittens, now able to access their mother's milk, showed immediate improvement. Their crying stopped, replaced by the contented sounds of nursing babies. Even our scout seemed to relax for the first time since I'd known him, finally allowing himself to sleep curled against his mother's neck. "They're going to make it," Sarah said as we watched the sunrise through the clinic windows. "All of them?" Jake asked. "I think so. Eleanor's turned the corner and the kittens are responding well. It'll be a long rehabilitation, but yes, I think they're all going to make it." Jake let out a shaky breath and buried his face in his hands. For a moment I thought he was crying. When he looked up, his eyes were red but dry. "Thank you," he said to Sarah. "Thank you for not giving up on them." "Thank Thomas," she replied. "And thank yourself. Your willingness to pay for their care, to take responsibility, that made the difference." "No," Jake said firmly. "What made the difference was a brave little kitten who refused to abandon his family, and a stubborn old man who paid attention when everyone else looked away." I thought about that assessment as we prepared to leave the clinic, about the chain of small actions that had led to this moment. My morning coffee routine that put me on the porch at the right time, the decision to follow instead of dismiss, Sarah's expertise and compassion, even Jake's ultimate willingness to face the consequences of his actions. "Every creature deserves a fighting chance," I said, the words carrying more meaning now than when I'd first spoken them. "Yes," Jake agreed, "they do." As we walked out into the morning light, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Michael's death. The deep satisfaction that comes from being exactly where you're needed, when you're needed most. Eleanor and her family had a fighting chance now, and maybe, just maybe, so did the rest of us. 2 months later, I stood in the parking lot of the Northern California Wildlife Preserve, watching Dr. Martinez and her team prepare for what we all knew would be our final goodbye. Eleanor had recovered beyond anyone's expectations, adapting to life on 3 legs with a grace that humbled everyone who witnessed it. The kittens, all 3 of them, had grown into healthy, robust young bobcats who showed every sign of being ready for life in the wild. But it was the final revelation that had shaken our small community to its core. The county investigation into Jake's illegal trap had uncovered something none of us expected. When wildlife officials surveyed the area around our neighborhood, they found evidence of a sophisticated poaching operation that had been running for months. Professional snares, bait stations, and trail cameras hidden throughout the forest. Eleanor hadn't been an accidental victim. She'd been targeted. "Thomas, you need to hear this," Detective Ray Kowalski had said when he'd called me 3 weeks earlier. "We've been building a case against a commercial wildlife trafficking ring. Bobcat pelts, mainly, but also live captures for the exotic pet trade." The news had hit our neighborhood like a physical blow. We'd all assumed Jake's careless trap was an isolated incident. The reality was far more sinister. Mr. Morrison's trap was crude amateur work, Detective Kowalski had explained during a community meeting. The real operation was professional grade. Hidden cameras show they'd been monitoring your development, tracking animal movement patterns between the residential area and the forest. "You mean Eleanor was—" Mrs. Patterson had struggled to finish the question. "Deliberately targeted, yes, ma'am. The trafficking ring had identified her as a mature female with kittens, exactly what exotic pet buyers pay premium prices for." Jake had taken the news harder than any of us. The guilt he'd been carrying over his accidental involvement had transformed into a burning determination to see justice done. He'd cooperated fully with the investigation, provided detailed maps of the area, even funded the removal of dozens of hidden snares and cameras. Now, standing in the preserve parking lot, Jake looked like a different man. Thinner, older, but somehow more solid. The swagger and bluster that had defined him for years had been replaced by something quieter, but stronger. "They're really ready?" he asked Dr. Martinez for the 10th time that morning. "They're ready, Jake. Eleanor's hunting success rate is over 90%. The kittens have learned everything they need to know from her. It's time." Our scout, now grown into a magnificent young male who'd earned the name Courage from the clinic staff, peered through the mesh of the transport carrier with those same intelligent amber eyes I'd first encountered on my front porch, but now there was something different in his gaze. He looked at us with awareness but not dependence, recognition but not need. "He remembers us," I said. "Of course he does," Sarah replied, "but watch his body language. No longer seeking human contact, no vocalizations for attention. He's fully wild again. It was what we'd hoped for, what we'd worked toward for months. So why did it feel like losing something precious?" The preserve director, Maria Santos, approached our group with a tablet showing aerial photos of the release site. "We've chosen a location about 5 miles from the main access road," she explained. "Perfect bobcat habitat, rocky outcroppings for denning, abundant prey, water sources, and most importantly, zero human activity." "What are the chances they'll stay together?" Mrs. Patterson asked. She'd become an unexpected regular at our weekly visits to the clinic, bringing homemade cookies for the staff and sitting quietly near the enclosures. "Eleanor and the female kitten, Lily, will likely stay together through the winter," Maria replied. "Courage and his brother Max will probably establish their own territories within the next few months. That's normal, healthy behavior." Jake pulled me aside as the staff began loading the transport carriers onto the all-terrain vehicle that would take the family to their release point. "Thomas, I need to tell you something." His voice was uncharacteristically serious. "The detective called this morning. They made arrests in the trafficking case." "That's good news." One of the arrests was Billy Hendricks. The name hit me like ice water. Billy Hendricks, Bob Henderson's nephew, the kid who'd been doing odd jobs around the neighborhood for the past year. The quiet young man who'd helped Mrs. Patterson with her garden, who'd fixed Jake's fence last spring. "Billy?" I couldn't process it. He's barely 20 years old. 22. And according to the police, he's been the inside man for the trafficking ring, mapping our neighborhood, identifying wildlife patterns, reporting back to his handlers about the best locations for traps and cameras. The betrayal felt personal in a way that surprised me. We'd welcomed this young man into our community, trusted him with our homes, our routines, and he'd been systematically cataloging our local wildlife for destruction. "How is Bob taking it?" Jake's expression darkened. "Hard. Real hard. Feels responsible, like he should have seen the signs." I thought about guilt, about the different ways it could destroy or motivate a person. Jake had channeled his guilt into action, into making amends, but Bob Henderson was 74 years old, and this kind of betrayal from family could break someone his age. "We should check on him when we get back," I said. "Already planned on it." Dr. Martinez called us over to the ATV. "If you want to see the actual release, we need to go now. The site is about a 30-minute drive, and we want to get them settled before the heat of the day." The journey to the release site was bumpy and dusty, following fire roads that hadn't seen maintenance in years, but the destination was worth the discomfort. A hidden valley surrounded by granite cliffs, with a clear stream running through stands of oak and pine. It looked like something from a nature documentary. "This is perfect," I breathed. 70,000 acres of protected habitat," Maria said proudly. "No hunting, no development, no human interference. They'll be safe here." The actual release was surprisingly quick and undramatic. Sarah opened Eleanor's carrier first, and the three-legged bobcat emerged with careful dignity. She sniffed the air, tested the ground with her remaining hind paw, then moved with surprising speed toward a cluster of boulders near the stream. Courage was next. He bounded from his carrier with the enthusiasm of youth, immediately beginning to explore his new territory. But even in his excitement, he stayed within sight of his mother, checking in with soft chirps that she answered with quiet rumbles. Max and Lily emerged more cautiously, staying close to each other as they followed their mother's lead. Within minutes, all 4 bobcats had disappeared into the rocky terrain, leaving only the faint sound of Eleanor's purr echoing off the canyon walls. "That's it?" Jake asked. "They're just gone?" "That's how it's supposed to work," Sarah explained. "No lingering, no looking back. They're home now." We stood in the empty clearing for several minutes, listening to the sounds of wind through the pines and water over stones. Somewhere in the rocks ahead of us, a family that had nearly been destroyed was beginning their new life. "I keep thinking about Billy Hendricks," I said finally, "about how we never suspected." "People hide things," Maria replied. "Sometimes terrible things. But they also do beautiful things when they think nobody's watching." She gestured toward the cliffs where the bobcats had vanished. "That little male spent weeks risking his life to save his family. Your neighbor Jake is paying for their care even though it's bankrupting him. You followed a wild animal into the darkness because you trusted your instincts over your fear." "And Eleanor?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "What was her beautiful thing?" "She never gave up," Sarah said simply. "Weeks of pain, infection, starvation, and she never stopped fighting for her babies." As we prepared to leave, Jake walked to the edge of the clearing and stood quietly for a moment. When he returned, his eyes were wet. "I told them I was sorry," he said. "I know they can't understand the words, but I think they understand the intention." "They understand," I assured him. "Trust me on that." The drive back to civilization was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. But as we reached the preserve entrance, Sarah's radio crackled with an update from the monitoring station. "Transport successful. All 4 subjects displaying normal exploration behaviors. No signs of stress or disorientation." Jake let out a breath I didn't realize he'd been holding. "They're really going to be okay." "They're going to be better than okay," I replied. "They're going to be free." 6 months after the release, I found myself back on my front porch with my morning coffee, watching the sunrise paint the hills gold and orange. The routine was the same, but everything else had changed in ways I was still discovering. Jake Morrison had become an unlikely ally in our neighborhood's transformation into what Mrs. Patterson now called a wildlife-friendly community. The man who'd once set illegal traps now spent his weekends building proper wildlife corridors and installing motion-activated cameras, not for poaching, but for monitoring the safe passage of animals through our area. "Morning, Thomas," Jake's voice called from across the street. He was heading out for his daily hike through the preserve lands behind our development, a routine he'd adopted after Eleanor's release. "Want to come see something interesting?" I set down my coffee and joined him, curious. Over the past months, Jake had become surprisingly knowledgeable about local wildlife behavior, driven by what he called his penance education. "What did you find this time?" "Follow me." He led me along the familiar path we'd both traveled so many times during the rescue, but instead of heading toward the old storm drain, he turned north toward a section of forest I'd rarely explored. "Jake, if this is another lecture about proper trail maintenance, just trust me on this one." We hiked for about 15 minutes before Jake stopped near a cluster of granite boulders, similar to the terrain where we'd released Eleanor's family. He pointed to a patch of soft earth near the base of the largest rock. "Look at those tracks." I knelt down, examining the clear impressions in the damp soil. 4 pads, retractable claw marks, the distinctive asymmetrical pattern of a bobcat. But these were larger than I remembered from our rescued family. "Male," I said. "Adult." "Big one." That's what I thought. But look over here. Jake led me a few yards away to another set of tracks, smaller and more delicate. "Female." "And here." He pointed to tiny impressions barely visible in the mud. "Kittens. Very young ones." The implications hit me slowly. "You think it's them?" I think Eleanor found herself a mate, and I think she's got a new litter." I stared at the tracks, my mind racing. The Northern California Wildlife Preserve was 60 miles away, but bobcats were known to travel considerable distances, especially young males establishing territories. Could Courage or Max have made it back to familiar territory? Could Eleanor have followed, drawn by some maternal instinct, to return to the place where she'd fought so hard to save her first family? "Jake, this is probably just coincidence. There are other bobcat families in these hills." "Maybe, but look at this." He led me to a fallen log near the boulder cluster. Scored into the bark were deep claw marks, the kind left by a three-legged animal learning to compensate for missing limb. My heart skipped. That could be from any injured animal. Could be. But I've been watching this area for 3 weeks now, Thomas. Every morning, same time, I see a three-legged bobcat teaching 2 young kittens how to hunt. She's got their whole education planned out, which rocks to climb, where to find water, how to avoid the human areas. The idea that Eleanor had not only survived but thrived enough to start a new family was almost too wonderful to believe. Yet the evidence was compelling. The location, the tracks, the distinctive scratches that suggested a three-legged animal. "Have you told Dr. Martinez?" "Not yet. Wanted to talk to you first." Jake's expression was serious. "If it is Eleanor, if she's successfully raising new kittens here, what's our responsibility?" It was a question that had been haunting me since the release. We'd worked so hard to return them to truly wild habitat. But what if their own instincts had brought them back to the edge of human civilization? What if Eleanor had chosen familiarity over the pristine wilderness we'd provided? "Our responsibility is to let them be wild," I said finally, "to observe without interfering, to make sure our community continues to be a place where wildlife can coexist safely with humans." Jake nodded. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." We spent another hour in the area, documenting what we'd found without disturbing the site. As we prepared to leave, I heard a sound that made my chest tight with recognition. A soft chirp, questioning and alert. On a rocky outcropping about 50 yards away, a young bobcat sat watching us. Even at that distance, I could see the intelligent amber eyes, the tufted ears, the confident posture of an animal comfortable in his own territory. "Hello, Courage," I whispered. The bobcat, I was now certain it was him, studied us for a long moment. Then he turned and bounded up the rocks with fluid grace, disappearing into the forest without a backward glance. "He remembered us," Jake said quietly. "He acknowledged us," I corrected. "But he didn't need us. That's the difference." Walking back toward the neighborhood, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with being right or successful. It was the contentment that comes from witnessing the completion of a natural cycle: rescue, rehabilitation, release, and now, renewal. "Thomas, I need to tell you something else." Jake's voice carried a weight I'd learned to recognize over the past months. "The district attorney called yesterday. Billy Hendricks pled guilty to all charges. He's going to testify against the trafficking ringleaders. The news should have felt like justice, but instead, it just made me sad. A young man's life derailed by greed and bad choices. A family torn apart by betrayal. Even successful prosecutions couldn't undo that kind of damage. How's Bob holding up?" "Better. He started volunteering at the wildlife clinic, actually. Says it helps him feel like he's making amends for his nephew's actions." "And you? How are you making amends?" Jake stopped walking and turned to face me. "Every morning when I hike these trails, I remember what my carelessness almost cost. Every time I see wildlife cameras documenting safe passage instead of targeting animals for slaughter, I remember that choices have consequences." He paused. And every time I think about giving up, about moving somewhere easier, I remember that Eleanor chose to come back here. If she can trust this place again, maybe I've earned the right to stay. We'd reached the edge of the neighborhood, where manicured lawns gave way to wild forest. Mrs. Patterson was working in her garden, but she'd left a wide border of native plants specifically for wildlife access. The Hendersons had installed a small pond that attracted birds and provided water for passing animals. Even the new families moving into the development were briefed on our wildlife-friendly policies. "You know what Margaret would have said about all this?" I asked Jake. "What?" "That the most important discoveries can't be measured or categorized, that sometimes you just have to trust your heart." Jake considered this. "Your wife sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was, and patient. Much more patient than I deserved." I thought about Eleanor, about the months of painful recovery, the trust she'd slowly rebuilt with humans who'd failed her. I think I'm finally starting to understand what she was trying to teach me. As we reached my house, I noticed a familiar figure sitting on my front porch. Dr. Martinez had a manila folder in her hands and a smile that suggested good news. "Sarah, what brings you by so early?" "I have something I thought you'd want to see." She opened the folder and pulled out a series of photographs. "The preserve sent these last week. Remote camera footage from the release site." The images were remarkable. Eleanor and her original family thriving in their protected habitat. But it was the final photograph that took my breath away. Eleanor, clearly recognizable by her three-legged gait, was pictured with 5 bobcats, her 3 original kittens now fully grown and 2 tiny new ones. "She had another litter," Sarah explained. "Probably mated with a male from the preserve's existing bobcat population. The genetic diversity is excellent for the local gene pool." I studied the photograph, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what Jake and I had discovered that morning. "Sarah, is it possible for bobcats to maintain territories in multiple locations? To move between preferred habitats?" "Absolutely. Especially intelligent, adaptable females. They'll establish primary and secondary territories, moving between them based on seasonal resources, mating opportunities, or raising young." She looked at me curiously. "Why do you ask?" I exchanged glances with Jake, who shrugged. "Because we think Eleanor might be closer than we thought." Over the next hour, we shared our morning's discoveries with Sarah, who listened with growing excitement. The idea that Eleanor had successfully established a territory that spanned both the protected preserve and our neighborhood was unprecedented in her experience. If this is true, it means she's not just surviving, she's thriving beyond our wildest expectations. Creating a family network across 60 miles of territory, raising multiple litters, contributing to genetic diversity in both populations. "And it means our work here isn't finished," I said. "No," Sarah agreed. "It means it's just beginning." As the afternoon sun slanted through my kitchen windows, I prepared dinner for one, but found myself setting 2 places out of habit. Margaret's chair remained empty, but somehow the house felt less lonely. Purpose had returned to my daily routines, meaning to my interactions with neighbors, hope to my thoughts about the future. Outside my window, the border between civilization and wilderness blurred in the golden light. Somewhere in those hills, a 3-legged bobcat was teaching her children the ancient lessons of survival and adaptation. Somewhere in those woods, a young male who'd once risked everything to save his family was establishing his own territory, carrying forward the courage his mother had taught him. And here in this small community of imperfect people, we were learning our own lessons about responsibility, redemption, and the possibility of second chances. "Every creature deserves a fighting chance," I said to the empty kitchen, Margaret's favorite phrase taking on new layers of meaning. Every creature, including the ones who make mistakes, who cause harm, who struggle to do better, including the ones who are brave enough to follow their hearts into the darkness, trusting that love and determination can overcome even the most impossible odds. As darkness settled over Pinewood Hills, I sat on my porch one last time, listening to the sounds of the night. Somewhere in the distance, a bobcat called to her young, a sound of pure contentment that carried across the valley like a blessing. We were all exactly where we belonged. In 73 years on this earth, I've learned that the most profound happiness doesn't come from avoiding life's storms, but from finding purpose in the midst of them. When I first saw that little bobcat kitten greeting strangers on my street, I thought I was witnessing something broken. What I discovered was something beautifully whole, a family refusing to give up on each other no matter the cost. That brave little soul taught me what Margaret had been trying to tell me for 40 years, that love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to step up and when to let go. Today, watching Eleanor raise her new family in the hills behind our neighborhood, I understand that second chances aren't just possible. They're what make life worth living. Whether you're 68 or 18, whether you're healing from loss or learning to trust again, there's always another sunrise waiting. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage, following your heart, paying attention to what others ignore, choosing hope over fear, can change everything. Every creature deserves a fighting chance, including ourselves. That's not just true for bobcats. It's true for grandparents, for neighbors who've made mistakes, for anyone brave enough to believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. Questions for reflection. What small creature in your life is trying to teach you something important that you might be overlooking? When was the last time you followed your instincts to help someone, even when logic told you to walk away? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear about the unexpected moments that changed your perspective on what really matters.